Hello, Year 10. My name's Miss Roper. Most of you don't know me because I've not taught you this year. This is probably going to be the most amateur video that you've ever watched. As you can see, I've not been able to get the proportions right on the screen. I'm sitting in my bedroom during lockdown. There's a picture on the wall there of Darth Vader, drawn by my lovely son Dylan, who may burst into the room at any point. And there is a picture of my son Dylan on the wall. That's actually where I tried to drill a hole into the wall to put the picture up on the wall, and the wall caved in. So my DIY is not very good. Anyway, I hope you're all safe and well during lockdown. I hope you're all doing lots of work. We decided that we wanted to put up some videos for you to make it a little bit more engaging. So I was nominated, I don't know why, probably because I'm not a familiar face to most of you. What we're actually going to do then today, we're going to do something on question 3, paper 1 for English language. It's probably an idea if you look at and read the extract that we'll upload for you. It's actually called The Boy Who Fell to Earth, and it's by a writer called Kathy Lett. So if you look at some of the resources that accompany this video, you should be able to find that resource. So I'm not going to read through the extract for you. I'm just going to talk about some strategies that you can use to approach this question. Okay, so assuming that you've all read the extract before I start talking about it, I just wanted to go through some strategies that I teach some of my classes each year. Hopefully you are all aware that this question, question 3, is the structure question. So the question is usually phrased, how has the writer structured the text to interest the reader? Now, something that I always point out to my pupils is that your response to how the reader is interested is particularly important on this question, more so perhaps than talking about the reader on the language question. So what we will talk about at some point, there we go, amateur video, no, let's get it the right way. What we will talk about at some point is the Marke scheme. So if you look at the resources that I've uploaded, you can see that there are 3 bullet points on the Marke scheme. The first bullet point is your ability to choose judicious quotations from the text to support the structural features that you find. The second bullet point on the Marke scheme is your ability to use subject terminology, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. And it's still upside down. And so we're going to just hope that you've got the sheet the right way. I think it's because I'm filming on a phone. And the third bullet point is your ability to analyse effect. So that will be anywhere where you talk about how and why the reader would be interested in the structural features that are being used. Okay, so throughout this video, the sheet is clearly going to be upside down to you. So please look at the sheet. Hopefully you've been able to print it off, or you can look at it at a different point. Okay, right. So one of the tips that I always give to my pupils, again, this is, oh no, this one looks like it's the right way. One of the tips that I give to my pupils is that they should always, no matter what the text is, highlight certain parts of the text, even before they've read it for this question. Now, those parts, as you can see in yellow, I always get them to highlight the first sentence and the last sentence of the extract, because you will have been taught by your teachers that you should always talk about the beginning and the end of a text. Those are 2 of the key structural features, okay? I then tell my pupils, as you can see in green, to highlight the first sentence or the topic sentence at the beginning of each new paragraph. Now, topic sentences are sentences that indicate to the reader what the subject of that paragraph is going to be, what the topic of that paragraph is going to be. So if you highlight the first sentence of each paragraph, it often tells you how the perspective or the focus is changing. So at a glimpse, you can read down the text and you can actually see that, for example, in paragraph 3, they might focus on a particular location, and then in paragraph 4, that focus might shift to a new location. So just to give you an example of that, In this text, we see that in paragraph 6, which begins with "I'm in the ambulance now," they're in the ambulance, clearly. And then paragraph 7 starts with the words "intensive care." So if you were writing about that, you would say that the writer has shifted perspective from the ambulance to intensive care. And that would interest the reader because we are being taken on a journey through those locations with the mother of the son who's been hit by the car. So by taking us on that journey, we're being encouraged to empathise with that mother and, walk alongside her as she's experiencing those events. So we highlight the first and the last sentence, and we highlight the first sentence or the topic sentence at the beginning of each paragraph. You might not talk about all of those paragraphs because you've only got 10 minutes. It's an 8-mark question, and you should have been told that you spend 10 minutes writing your answer. So there's no way that you will write about all of those perspective shifts. You will just choose some of them that are the most relevant and the most appropriate to talk about. Then I also tell pupils, as you can see in blue here, hopefully, that they should be highlighting a pivotal moment. Now, if you're unclear what a pivotal moment is also known as a structurally significant sentence, and it's a point in the text where either new information is revealed or there's a turning point, a change of mood in some way. It can often be a climactic point, so if you're unsure about that term, it comes from the word climax. So often these bits in blue that I've indicated might be at a point that's particularly dramatic in the text, and you would pick that out, you would quote it for your quotations, and you would comment on why that would interest the reader, why it is a climax, how does it, encourage people to read further to find out how that climax is resolved. Please notice there that I didn't just say this would make readers want to read on. That's one of the worst comments that you can make, but we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So just to sum up so far, if you highlight the first and the last sentence, the beginning of each paragraph, and you try and find at least one pivotal moment, a turning point in the text, you've got some key structural features to talk about. The beginning, the end, some perspective shifts throughout the text, and some pivotal moments, some key turning points. As you can see, I highlighted 2 pivotal moments. Often there's not only one answer for a pivotal moment. With English, the benefit of the subject is that if you can justify why you believe a moment is pivotal and you can give a valid explanation of that, then that's perfectly fine. So here, I would have chosen either one of these 2 points, and I'll talk a little bit more about those later. Okay, so the second sheet, which is the one that for some reason seems to be upside. Is it upside down? No. This is where it's very amateur, the video. So I hope you're all having a good laugh at it as well. So at the top of the sheet, the second sheet, you will be able to see then that I've actually listed some structural features that you should be writing about. And the words that are in bold are actually your subject terminology for this question. So one of the biggest errors that we see on this question is that pupils confuse subject terminology for question 2, the language question, and question 3, the structure question. So I'm just going to hold that back a second. Okay, so question 2, the language question, your subject terminology would be words like simile, metaphor, pattern of language, pattern of verbs, adverbs, so all of those linguistic terms. When you are talking about structural features, you need to be talking about beginnings, you need to be talking about perspective and focus shifts, endings, and when you are talking about endings, you'll need to possibly consider whether circular narrative has been used, so whether the beginning and the end link in any way. You will need to possibly talk about things like foreshadowing. So often writers at the end of extracts, they will foreshadow or hint at what is about to happen. Now, we don't expect you to be psychic. We don't expect you to know for definite what's going to happen next, But if you can form a reasonable guess based on the evidence that you've been given and justify it, then that's perfectly acceptable, okay? You should also think about, when you look at the end of texts, whether it ends on a climactic point, so on a climax. And if so, how and why would that interest the reader? As I've mentioned earlier, you should always look, the next point in bold, at a structurally significant sentence or a pivotal moment. The fifth technique that I always encourage pupils to look for is juxtaposition, which, as I'm sure you're all aware, is the setting up of opposites in a text. So often in an extract, you might be introduced, for example, to say two characters. They might be presented as polar opposites in that text, so that you can see the qualities of one character compared to another. So in that instance, you would say that the writer has deliberately juxtaposed two characters, and it would interest the reader because we are seeing the qualities of one character compared to the qualities of another. So that's just one example of how writers might use juxtaposition in an extract. And then you'll notice that I've put 3 extra bullet points underneath there. Motif, dialogue, and narrative perspective. So a motif is a recurring image in a text. The reason that I've not actually put that word in bold, it's going to be a very relevant word for literature when you study Sign of the Four, Macbeth, etc. But it tends to be more relevant when you're looking at a whole text. With the short extracts that you get for the English language paper, it's less likely that you will find motifs in those extracts. However, it's there just as a structural term for you to become familiar with. Dialogue is often used in the extracts that you're given, so possibly you can comment on that. My only, my only comment is that lots of pupils who do try to write about dialogue find it quite difficult to explain how and why it would interest readers. I've just put on there that it's often used to demonstrate how characters interact with each other. It involves the readers directly into the action, etc. Okay, so do consider whether dialogue is used at any point. Narrative perspective, so whether something is first person, third person, is classed as a structural feature, but again, it's something that pupils often can identify, but they struggle to explain. So what I would say in summary then is that the top 5 bullet points, which I've put in bold, those are the key structural features that I would be telling you to look for in a text. You don't have to write about them in that order, but obviously it's logical to talk about the beginning first. All of the things in bold, like I've said earlier, are your subject terminology. So these are the types of words that should be occurring in your answer, along with your quotations and along with your comments on how and why readers would be interested. Just to go back to some of those points, when you talk about the beginning then, something that I encourage pupils to do, I've written it onto the sheet, I'm sure you can't read it from there, is consider what does the writer immediately establish, okay? So, and what is omitted, what is missed out. So often in the first sentence of an extract, a writer will give you answers to some of the following questions. They might tell you when an event is taking place. They might tell you where it's happening, why it's happening, who's involved, and it might also tell you what is happening. Now, what I would like you to think about is that if a writer revealed the answer to all of those 5 questions in the first sentence, then there would be absolutely no suspense. So often they will only answer one or some of those questions. So if you actually look at the extract that we're talking about today, The Boy Who Fell to Earth, it starts with the sentence, "The car hits my 16-year-old son at 35 miles per hour." So we know what's happened, the car has hit somebody. We know who is involved, a 16-year-old boy, and we know a little bit about how it happened, 35 miles per hour. What we don't know, so the information that is omitted, is why was a 16-year-old boy in the middle of a road when he should know better at his age? We don't know who else is involved in the story. We don't know when it happened. So if I were writing a comment about the beginning of this text, I might say something such as, at the beginning of the text, the writer immediately establishes who is involved in the action, because we're told that there's a 16-year-old boy, and we are told what has happened to him. A car has hit him. So I would embed some quotations. I would then say, this would interest the reader because although we know what has happened, we don't know why or how these events have come about. This would therefore intrigue the reader because they would want to know why a 16-year-old boy is in the middle of a road. I've also put onto there that you should always consider, does it start in medias res, which means does it start at a point of action? So this text clearly does, because it almost begins at a climactic point, the climax, one of the most exciting parts of the story. Now, lots of writers do that, firstly because it does intrigue you immediately, and it does, it's quite a powerful dramatic opening to the text, but also it allows the writer after that point to use flashback. So if you move down to the second point, the bullet point, the focus shift then from being at the point of action in the beginning, it shifts to flashback, where we find out why the boy ran out into the road. So starting in medias res at the point of action or at a climactic point allows a writer to then use flashback, where they reveal the events running up to that incident, to that dramatic moment. So again, if you look in the actual text we're looking at, the second paragraph, we find out in that paragraph that the mother, well, we actually find out later in the first paragraph, we find out that the mother has insulted her son. They've had an argument. She said to him that she wishes she'd never had him, and that causes him to run out into the road. So you can see then that the beginning is interesting because it's dramatic and climactic, and then flashback is used by the writer to reveal how that event came about. So we are being exposed to more and more information gradually. So all of those suspenseful moments are being explained for us. Okay, right. So again, if I were looking then at perspective shifts, I've already spoken about how the perspective shifts shift from place to place at several points in this text. So at one point we're in the ambulance, at one point we're in intensive care, and then we're taken to the toilet where the mother vomits. As I mentioned earlier, those perspective shifts are interesting because they allow the reader to go on that virtual journey with the mother, and we're being encouraged to empathise with her, to put ourselves in her shoes and feel her pain, feel her torment. Then when you speak about the ending, in this particular text, we're told, regret and remorse swamps me like a tidal wave, drowning me in its folds. So if I were talking about that ending, going back to some of the things I've encouraged you to look for, I would say that we are left on a cliffhanger. It's a cliffhanger, isn't it? Because we don't know at that point whether the boy is going to wake up from this coma. So we are left, like the mother, in suspense as to what the outcome will be of that event. So you could talk about the use of cliffhanger. Okay, and again, you could even talk about foreshadowing. Perhaps this foreshadows that the mother is never going to get the opportunity to reconcile, to make amends with her son. We don't know. As long as it's a valid response, that's all that matters. So I would talk about the ending. The structurally significant sentences, which I identified before in blue. So I would argue that when she says in the middle of the text, which is often where pivotal moments can be, she says that after her son is hit by the car, the world darkens and everything goes black. Now, to me, I would argue that that's a pivotal moment because it reveals that at that point her life completely changes. So before that moment, she's lived for 16 years with her son. And then after that moment, she doesn't know whether she's going to get any more time with her son, whether he's going to survive. So it's pivotal, it's climactic, it's a dramatic point in the text. And it also reveals just how important her son is to her. Now, moving on to the next point, the next structural feature, which is juxtaposition, and leading on from what I've just said, you could argue that when she says her world darkens, suggesting that her life is almost over, now her son's been injured, that's juxtaposed against earlier, where she says, I wish I'd never had you. So hopefully you can see that those two ideas are completely opposite. So at the beginning, in the heat of the moment, in an argument, she says that she wishes she'd never had him. And then later, her world seems to end when he's injured in this car accident. So the two moments seem to contradict each other. And you would talk about how and why that interests the reader. So hopefully you can see that the top 5 bullet points that I've suggested that you write about are all there in that text. So I would encourage you, and we are going to upload, it should be on there for you, a different extract where you can apply some of these strategies. So again, I'll just recap some of the strategies that I've suggested you use. So look at the beginning and the end of the text, possibly highlighting the first and the last sentence. Consider what's established at the beginning and what is omitted, what's missed out. Why might that interest us? With the end, consider whether it's a cliffhanger or whether it foreshadows, hints at anything that's going to happen in the rest of the text. Highlight the beginning of each paragraph. That may possibly help you understand how the perspective or the focus shifts between those paragraphs. And then also try to highlight a pivotal moment, a moment where new information is revealed or something dramatically changes. If you can then find some example of juxtaposition where opposites or contradictions are made in the text, then do so. So those would be your top 5 features to try and identify and to try and explain. Okay, just moving on to the second sheet. Obviously, I've spoken about the features, the mark scheme. I've given you the top tips for highlighting on the text. Some things that I would warn you about, and again, I'm sure you can't see it on there, but you'd be best to look on the sheet that you've either printed yourself or that you've read at a separate point. Some of the things you should never say when you are talking about readers and how they're interested. Never say that the writer has used foreshadowing to suggest something bad is going to happen. It's really vague, it's really generalised, and it will be in the lowest band on the mark scheme if you use comments like that. Now, I'm sure you're all aware that your comments on effect are the thing that actually takes you up the mark scheme. So you need to avoid comments like that, like the plague. You should also never say, this would make the reader want to read on. The reason you shouldn't say that is because if it were that easy to pass a GCSE, we would just train every pupil to write that comment and everyone would pass. So it's a generalised comment again. You could say it about any text in the world, about any extract. It's not a valid answer. It doesn't mean anything. Do not say this would intrigue the reader. That basically is the same as the one previous to this one. And then try not to say this would interest the reader because we would want to know what happens next. Again, that comment you could say about any sentence or any extract or any text in history. It's vague, it's generalised, it's not specific to that text. So please, if you find yourself saying those things, get rid of them or develop them. So what I've done underneath, I've shown you how you can develop those comments to make it specific to that text and relevant. So rather than saying the writer's used foreshadowing to suggest something bad's going to happen, to make it relevant to this text, I might say, The writers use foreshadowing to imply that later in the novel, the protagonist may have to deal with a devastating event like the death of her son. So you can see that I've made it very, very relevant to the text that I've read. The second suggested comment that you might make about this text. This would make the reader eager to read on, to find answers to their initial questions about the problems in the mother and son's relationship. Perhaps later in the novel, these problems may be discussed. So rather than just saying this would make the reader want to read on, I've said why. What is it that we want to find out? Well, we want to find out what are the problems, and the writer probably will reveal those problems through flashback throughout the text. So flashback really is a key structural feature. I'm not going to read the next two to you. You can read those yourselves. I am going to read, however, at the bottom, the model response. Again, you're probably best to look at your own copy here. You'll notice that I've highlighted sections in green, yellow and blue. That corresponds to the Marke scheme here. So anything in yellow is a quotation. Anything in green is a subject term for structure. And anything in blue is where I talk about how and why readers would be interested. So a suggestion that I would make is when you write your answers for the structure question, actually reflect on whether you are covering all three areas, and possibly when you're practicing, highlight the 3 bullet points on the Marke scheme in your response. It's a very good visual indication of whether you are meeting the requirements of the Marke scheme. Okay, so let's have a read. The text opens in medias res, immediately establishing what has happened and who has been involved, as we are told that the car hits my son at 35 miles per hour, interesting the reader as this provokes questions in the reader's head, such as why was a young man who should know about road safety in the path of this vehicle. It also creates a feeling of disequilibrium, that means discomfort, for the reader, as we are immediately intrigued as to what the outcome of this event will be. Later in the text, just by using a phrase like later in the text, you're talking about structure. So later in the text, the writer shifts focus by firstly using flashback to the events prior to the crash, where we are told that just 2 minutes earlier, the boy's mother had told her son during an argument that he had ruined her life. This would interest the reader as this pivotal moment is apparently the reason for the boy running off and running out into the road. Readers would empathise with the mother at this point, as she has spoken in the heat of the moment and cannot claw her words back. Later in the text, we are taken on a virtual journey with the mother, as the focus shifts from the ambulance to intensive care and finally to the toilet, allowing the reader to experience the mother's trauma with her and increasing our empathy with her. The writer also juxtaposes the fact that the mother claimed the son had ruined her life against the fact that everything goes black when he is hit by the car, reinforcing to the reader that in fact the mother's initial words were spoken in the heat of the moment and she does indeed love her son dearly. At the end of the text, the writer uses a cliffhanger as we are told that regret and remorse swamps the mother, increasing the reader's uncertainty as to whether the mother will ever get the opportunity to reconcile with her son. So that would be, a top mark answer probably. It covers those 5 structural features that I suggested. So those structural features are all the things that are in green. The comments that are in blue are all about effect on the reader or how and why the reader would be interested. And anything in yellow is a judicious quotation. Okay, so I know I've included a lot there. Hopefully you might be able to take away a few strategies. We will have uploaded, like I say, another practice question 3 for you to have a go at. Sorry about the very amateur video. I hope some of you have managed to get through to the end of this video, and next time I'll try and get my equipment sorted so that I I fill more of the screen. Whether that's a good thing or not, I don't know. Anyway, thank you. I'm almost at exactly 30 minutes as well. Enjoy Year 10. Goodbye.